flag football, but it got canceled. Yeah. Yeah, there's a league in the law school. So.
I tried to play football on the airport.
That's good. That's good.
That's where you're going.
We should do that. All right. We should keep in touch. All right. See you later.
Very nice. And of course, I Bob inside. There's Larry Keller.
Where's Carol Trent?
It's next week.
Oh my God! There she is! Hello, sweetie. Hello, Carol. Oh, we already did this.
I have my dates all mixed up.
John Louise.
Yes, but I will. I mean, I will. Well, I got it right. No. Okay, that's all right. I have a really good excuse. I'm posting live, so I get around to it.
My mother-in-law lives there, so I go there regularly. Actually, I was there this summer. I go there a lot.
I wanted to do like low-end coffee.
Jeg fikk meg Caroline på interessant med dagen til accident-banen av det.
Oh, you've got, she has a video camera. Oh my goodness sakes, video cameras. I know how to run those, but I don't have one. Come on.
I'm trying to get everybody in.
Fedora looks like a great success in Charles.
Take your seats. Come on in, everybody. John's trying to use a microphone, but often that doesn't work with a crowd like this.
Good to see you.
So come on in and grab a seat. Grab the water on your way in.
And still busy.
And I'll turn it back to John.
Hi everyone. Welcome to the University. Welcome back to the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome to the School of Design, and welcome to the Department of City and Regional Planning. My name is John Landis. I'm the current chair of the department, and as I look at your name tags, I actually see a lot of people whose work I've read and whose work I've studied, but I'll say that I studied this relatively recently, not when I was a person. It's really a pleasure to have all of you here, and I'm going to say a few things and tell you a little bit about what the department looks like today, so you can draw some contrasts, or perhaps there aren't so many contrasts, well, with what it was like just a few years ago. But before I do that, and I know Paul has a great discussion planned for you today, I'd like to introduce Richard Fitzgerald. Rick is our Associate Dean for Development and External Relations, and he's going to welcome you on behalf of our team.
Thank you, John. So actually, interestingly enough, John is almost correct, which is probably par, I should say, I won't say par for the course. Of all of our 5 department chairs, John is among my most favorite. And I think we share both a similar sense of humor and background, having lived in that delightful American town of Berkeley, California, commonly known as Berkeley. What is that parade? The Berkeley Day Parade, or whatever it is every year? John probably never went to see it, one of my favorite memories. My name is Rick Fitzgerald. I'm actually the Associate Dean for External Relations. And so I actually get to spend most of my time doing what we euphemistically call alumni engagement. And that's not actually fundraising. That has to do with the fact that I believe, I came here 2 years ago, and I loved working with my designers and planners to create campuses where the learning was more effective, where the learning was more dynamic, and where the learning was more engaged. And so to be able to be in this environment with all of these designers and planners at Penn Design has been a real joy for me. But the dean and I decided that we need to literally start a program of engagement and outreach to our alumni that simply said, we're here to enter into a dialogue with you. Because I'm a firm believer that once you're a graduate of a school, obviously you're back here, you're a graduate of that school forever. And in order to be an effective graduate of that school forever, there has to be a conversation, there has to be an engagement, there has to be a dialogue. So that is the primary part of my job, and it is a real thrill to do it, let me tell you. So I am thrilled to see all of you back here today. You're going to have a ball with John and everybody else that you get to engage with, and I'll get to hear all about it from John on Monday morning, I hope. Finally, let me say, welcome from Dean Taylor. She's engaged with another big innovation conference on the other side of campus today. Wishes she could be here, but she's on like 6 panels and she's introduced 5 other speakers, and so she has quite a day planned for herself. But she asked me to bring my greetings and my welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming home. It's back to John.
Thank you, Rick. Again, thank you all for coming. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Which question first?
Here we go. This is Jack.
Paul sent us a series of questions. One of the first one was, how well did the planning program in the late 60s prepare us for our work? And one of the things that I found as I reflect on this, and I seldom have time to do, is I came here to planning in Penn because it was social planning. As I went to looked around at other alternatives at that point in time, there were very few planning programs that had a social policy bent. So I came here in part because of environmental interests as well, which I maintain, but the social has really consumed me. So I had an interest in housing, in poverty, working with Bill Grigsby, who's been here, and I'll say a little more about that. And I guess leading pieces here. I got to work with Bill Grigsby on a study of the Office of Economic Opportunity programs in the city of Baltimore. We had a 3 or 4 year project to evaluate. And one of the first things Bill and co-PI did was recognize that regardless of how effective poverty programs were, they were just 6% of the anti-poverty budget. So So we focused on two other things: housing, and I taught a housing class for 42 years. And the second is on jobs, employment, the best route out of poverty. And again, much of my career is focused on how do we get jobs in a Midwest economy that had been flourishing. When I arrived there in 1972, it had the highest minority income of any city in the country. Today we have 30+% in poverty. We lost tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs. So it's an enormous lift that is we're trying to do, and I'll say a little more about that later. You know, the interest in poverty, social issues, skill to take this on. And I spent a lot of my time initially as a researcher and gaining credibility for looking at problems relatively objectively. And then because of that, I started getting involved much more in actions. So I've become involved in many initiatives, some of which at this moment seem to be doing quite well.
You have brought us together from so many places. As my tag says, I'm Elsie Garces Crossman. I attended planning in 1966 to 68 at Penn. We tried to summarize my job. I'm probably one of the few that have done a more traditional planning, that have more traditional planning experience. Our planning focus on concepts that's similar to what the chair was talking about: land use, locational theory, transportation, demand impacts, housing costs, etc. We also dealt with poverty and inequality at the same time. Our class was, and probably that's the same thing now, I don't know, was organized in teams. We were a class of many disciplines. I was one of the few architects, physical planning types in teams. Liberal arts graduates to mathematicians. However, and that made me appreciate the contributions that other fields.
And the numbers you have quoted are in some ways the result of these ladders of opportunities working over decades. Were I to come to Penn today, I would spend probably 2 weeks here, go back to the airport, and fly back. Why? Because what is happening now is that these ladders of opportunities are being destroyed one by one by one. They are essentially, I hope you're right, and then 20 years from now the statistics will continue going in the same direction. I don't believe so. Because the eroding power of inequality today is such that it is destroying the sense that we all belong to the same society, which was very, very strong when we got here together. We may not have always done it right, but we had a feeling that our education gave us a privilege to try to build a more equal society. This today is, I'm afraid, it's not the case. Where the best and the brightest in 1967 when they came here did not go to business school. They came to Penn to study and improve the world. Today, they all go to not only to business school, but to the financial stream in business schools, because that's where you make the money. And the evolution of our society has created the kind of inequality which put at risk the statistics that you're quoting today. And there may not be racial discrimination in housing, but there's income discrimination in housing. There may not be the blocking of minority kids from going to school, but they don't get the education they need when they are young to be able to make it through the life cycle. So that the ladders of opportunity that some of us, and we've heard some very good examples of it, have built over the years, based in part of the experience we had here and the strong sense that we reinforce each other's belief that it was possible to do things differently, then those things are being destroyed. Whether it's the Supreme Court, whether it's the craziness, the politics of Washington, and it's not true simply in the United States, it's true worldwide. You really have a growth of inequality between rich and poor countries, you have a growth of inequalities within countries, and this, to me, is an acid that is destroying the social fabric in a way that makes it much more difficult to do the kinds of things that some of us have spent our lives trying to do. So I take the statistics you give me, but if I try to project them 20 years from now, I am not sure that the trajectory will be the same unless you guys wake up and begin to realize that there is more to life than simply a nice design or a good job, that we are really the stewards of the future. And right now, unfortunately, I am not terribly optimistic about how these numbers are going to potentially go the other way. So what I learned at Penn is really the fact that if enough people have enough commitment, enough belief, the guts of going in the streets or doing what Bob and others have done for so many years, then things can change. But change is never something you take for granted. You have to keep at it. You have to keep fighting for it. And unfortunately, I see that this sort of social fabric is fraying right now, and I'm very worried about it.
You may hear lessons for Penn, I hope so. You may hear lessons for practice, I hope so. I taught for several years as a distinguished educator at Portland State University when it was a fledgling urban university trying to serve its city, that is Portland, Oregon. The planning department really didn't know very much about what it was doing, and perhaps neither did I, but these are the two things that I did that contributed mightily to the strength of that planning program, and by doing so, the strength of the planning activity in Portland and in Oregon, which are now quite famous for their, in some respects, success. One thing I asked students to do in small groups and individually, each one of them chose to do a thesis of some kind. I asked them to choose an institution that had some affinity with what it was that they were interested in doing, changing, improving, and get to know that institution. So they would come back to me, or come back to the group, or come back to the group and me, and they would describe how that institution worked. And whoops, they wouldn't know one blessed thing about how that institution worked. And it was clear that if it hadn't been for that exposure, they would have graduated with a planning degree without any idea how institutions work, in which they're going to go to with their grand ideas and expect to have some success. So their requirement was then to go back and study that institution further. Where does their power come from? Who are their leaders, and where did those leaders come from? And what do those leaders care about? And who pays them? And pay in a variety of definitions. And they would come back and talk about, in a richer sense, what they knew of these institutions. And of course they would have to go back into the field and then relearn and learn more deeply in a more complex way how these institutions worked. And with what other institutions are they hegemonic? So now they come back and they have some sense of what it is they're engaging when they go into the world in order to do good, in order to improve the society. Very, very empowering and slow-knit work. It changed the institutions in the process of their engagement because the institutions became more aware of themselves and more aware of their own potential to do good. This is education, and this is the kind of education that I hope planners are subject to. Now, another thing that we did at Portland State, that was my instigation, in the initial studio, which was a professional practice studio, terribly important 3 words. In that studio, their obligation was to be faithful to the code of ethics of the planning profession. And in short, at that time, the planner was to be faithful to, loyal to, subject to, responsible to oneself, one's client, the profession, and the body politic. And I would add one more now, the democracy, and implicitly its failures, and implicitly what comes along with democracy, liberty, equality, and fraternity, community. And they would not be able to escape that studio without being accountable explicitly in the juries and to their supervisors for, all right, how were you faithful to yourself and responsible to yourself in the work that you did in that studio? That is a question that's asked in the jury, and answers are expected. All right, how were you faithful to your client? Who was your client? How did you decide who your client was? Anyway, how did you choose your client? And in this case, they always chose their own client. All right, now all of your peers here and across the world, how were you accountable to them? How were you responsible to them in the way you thought about your project and how you carried it out? And much more fundamentally, how were you responsible to justice? How were you responsible to equality? How were you responsible to a tighter-knit society, locally and worldwide? You've got to answer those questions or you don't pass the studio. Empowering work, tightly knit work, and wonderful work. The rewards that I got from doing those 2 things at this measly, picayune, urban university, Portland State, at that time, the rewards I got were monumental. And they built myself to a point where I'm a much, much finer educator than, thank you very much, you thought I was when I was at Penn. I had an occasion 10 years ago, right before my health failed for almost a decade, and now I'm coming back from it, to do a week-long meditation. I had never done such a thing in my life, but at that point I really needed to do it, and there was an opportunity given for me to do it. And right square in the middle of that meditation, at its deepest point, one whole week, you don't speak with anybody except one time the director of the meditation experience. And a voice came to me from the right-hand side, and it said, I am safe, I am competent, I am free. We want the people of the world to be safe, to be able to go home and say, hi, I'm home, and be embraced. And we want a house for them to go to, and so on. I am competent. I am equal to my neighbor in terms of what I can do. No comparison with, but isn't it beautiful to compare with my neighbor who can do something else and make a good living in the process? I am competent, and I am free to do whatever I goddamn well please with the people I love and the community of which I am a member. These are the things that we need to be working for in planning always, from beginning to end. Thank you for allowing me to do a sermon.
More paintings out in there. This is very big. Smaller one like this one. Like this one. Oh yeah,
We really love that, honey.
oh yeah,
Funny these wasn't there. How much?
Which neighborhood? There's a neighborhood tour tomorrow. John Cromwell. Or a neighborhood tour of neighborhood. Even from Bob
When you got Microsoft,
And there's a bed for heavy stuff. Rose carrying her house gun. I have to carry my iPad. Right. There's a bed in that room.
We didn't have any trouble finding it.
I know. That's because you weren't paying attention.
Hi, Carol.
The houses go 6705, 6703, 6699, 6701.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, I'm taking a picture of you. I like to have it, picture of everybody.
Do you remember me? I was the
Diane
secretary.
Kathleen.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't remember you.
You know.
When I remember you, you were very, very thin, young.
Oh, thanks.
And you're a wonderful person.
As were we all. Right? That's where I was thinking.
Maybe that's
something else to add to the curriculum
So there is
of
no
the
difference
city planning.
between you and Norm Griffin there.
I actually
It was a dynamic duo.
I was thinking in line of.
I'm Joe.
No.
You too.
No, that's our program ceremony did.